Hello everyone and welcome back to Creation Myths. Today we're going to go over this article from Donny and Matt Naylor that's standing for truth and raw Matt. It's called Refuting Dr. Dan's Premature Criticism, mtDNA Fixation and Failed Objections, Why Pedigree Rates, Population Genetics, and the Babel Model Collapse the Evolutionary Narrative. Now, I have been getting a lot of attention from Standing for Truth lately. I think they're kind of running out of things to talk about, especially since they can't have Kent on anymore for the debate stuff that they used to do pretty regularly. So I think they're just kind of running out of things to talk about, which means they're just going to talk about the stuff that they've been talking about for 5 years. And some of that stuff is mitochondrial DNA and pedigree mutation rates and my criticisms of the creationist narrative around those issues. So I did a pretty quick informal thing looking at one of their articles recently, and this is the response to that. Now, they've got other stuff that they've produced about me since then. I'm not going to cover it because it has no substance, honestly. This is really the only one that has any actual substance to it. And I'm using that phrase kind of loosely here. There's not really a whole lot that we're going to see, as you'll see. Now, despite kind of the unserious nature of what's going on here, there are two reasons that I think it's important to cover it. One is that, this is their attempt at a comprehensive response to the arguments I and others have made regarding the very poor creationist work around the calculations of the mitochondrial most recent common ancestor and the implications for young Earth creationism, right? They claim that mitochondrial Eve existed 6,000 years ago, and when you do the calculations correctly, you get a time somewhere in the 1 to 200,000 year ago range. So here we have a whole bunch of arguments that are theoretically responses to the criticisms of the young Earth work and the explanations for the actual correct dates. Here we have a whole bunch of responses to those arguments, right? So it's important for people who are in this space having these conversations to hear why this stuff is wrong. The second reason I think it's important to do this is that, as silly as this is with this is a research ministry or whatever, truth and research, right? It's kind of silly as this all is. What we're going to see here is actually on the merits not that different from what you're going to get from, for example, Nathaniel Jeanson at Answers in Genesis, right? The real professional creationists, the actual creation science ministries are actually basically as bad as a pair of YouTube randos. So in going through these arguments, we can equip people with the tools to deal with the big boys, right? So that's what we're going to do here. So the way we're going to do this is going to be real informal. I've gone through this and I've just highlighted a few places, things that I want to talk about. Really straightforward. And in some of those places, I've actually left little notes. And as we go through, everybody can play a game. You can guess what the notes are going to be that are the refutations of the points that are being made there. See if you can guess ahead of time what I'm going to say in response to the creationist arguments. Now, this is 22 pages long. The actual document, it's funny, it starts off pretending to be a paper, so it has an abstract, and then we just abandon that right away, and it's just a laundry list of argument, response, and you actually get through that very quickly. The appendices are here on page 9, and there's still then a bunch of stuff after that where there are other arguments. I don't really understand the structure. It's fine. We're just going to go through it. I'm going to skip a lot because a lot of it is highly repetitive, and there's no point in addressing the same argument or response multiple times. There are several places where the wording is almost word for word identical. As you go through from one page and then 3 pages later and then another 2 pages after that, you'll find sections that are almost word for word identical. We don't have to address all of them. We can just do it once. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go through this. And the thing that I want everyone to see, in addition to the actual substance of why these arguments are wrong, the thing I want everyone to see is how unserious this is. These are not wrong for technical reasons or complicated reasons. These are wrong because they're either misreading or misrepresenting the source they're using. It's really that bad. So we're going to go through and look at this and talk about it. And that's it. That's what this video is going to be. So we're not going to get into the abstract. I can skip that. We'll get down to the author's note. I suspected what Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal's response would be. I anticipated his complaints. I predicted he would dodge. I mean, this has a little, like, I forget the exact wording, but it was like, I was born of the sword. Like, it has that kind of vibe going. Stanton continues, he is unwilling to advance this debate in any meaningful manner. Here's the thing. In order for the debate to advance, you have to address the actual points I am making, not just repeat the same thing as though it is a refutation. So as we will see down lower in the document, they're not actually addressing the arguments I have made in any way. I have advanced the debate to the point where you've made an argument, here's the counter argument. Now, a response to that has to be something new. It can't just be the same thing you said before. Pedigree rates show a recent mitochondrial eve. Well, here's all the reasons that's wrong. Multi-generation pedigrees, calibration based on known migration events, yada, yada, right? We go through. Purifying selection in the mitochondria reduces fixate, right? We go through all those things. And then you go down into the responses and it's, but pedigree rates. That's the same thing you said the first time. There's nothing new in here. They put a little twist on it. It's newly formatted. It's this new article, but there's not actually a whole lot of new stuff here. So I would love to move this debate forward, Donny. Ball's in your court on that one. You have to actually respond to the arguments I'm making. I wanted to highlight this part. Anyone who has followed my work knows I've been developing these points for years. They're the same points you've been making for as long as I can remember. So developing is a stretch, but yes, these are the same things you've been using for years. So let's get down into here. Let's walk through his objections, my objections, point by point. There's a couple that are like stylistic here. So dodging with distractions, you get annoyed that I critiqued his use of AI and how the styling, it has like the emojis and stuff from AI. So here's the thing. Using AI in your writing is bad. I said it. Like, it's bad and lazy. Write your own stuff. And like, I don't know why this is hard to understand. It's not wrong because you're using AI. It's just bad and sloppy and lazy because you're using AI. I think, what's the phrase the kids use these days? Or maybe I'm out of date. Maybe they used it a few years ago, but like, writing with AI is cringe. I think that's the phrase. I'm old. I don't know. Don't use AI in your writing, folks. Write your own stuff. Proofreading is good. Also, AI will lie to you, just like about facts. So you can't rely on AI models to like accurately check you on things or provide accurate information for you. You have to do that research yourself using actual reliable, verifiable sources. So yes, writing with AI is bad. Using emojis in something that is pretending to be a research article is bad and immature. Yes, I stand by those criticisms. So now let's get down to the actual stuff here. This first one is looking at this paper, Connell et al., from 2022, looking at Norfolk Islands and basically the settlement of the Norfolk Islands and the mutation rates since then. Basically, how many mutations have accumulated since then and what rate is that? Now, they quote in response this line from that paper. Estimates of the mutation rate with a non-phylogenetic approach, namely pedigree analysis, are reported to be approximately tenfold higher than phylogenetically derived rates. Right? Pedigree rates are consistently an order of magnitude faster, yada, yada, yada. Connell doesn't overturn that. It confirms it. Here's the thing. This sentence right here, anybody want to guess what the problem here is? It's a very common one that creationists make. This sentence right here is not describing the findings in Connell et al. It's the authors describing the state of the field otherwise. Right? This is them describing prior findings, right? So they go on to say in like that same paragraph, Connell et al. Write, quote, if mutations arise randomly in the empty genome, these results, in other words, what they did in this paper, suggest that newly arising mutations in the human mitochondrial coding region are eliminated before they reach a detectable frequency. And that is in line with other findings, such as the fact that approximately 84% of the mitochondrial DNA is identical across all of humans. That's indicative of extremely strong purifying selection in that coding region, which is about 90% of the mitochondrial genome. So, yeah, the pedigree rates are reported to be faster, but when you look at a time frame where purifying selection can operate, it's slower, and it seems like there's a lot of purifying selection happening. Yeah, and that reduces fixation rates, that reduces substitution rates, which is why the time frame is longer than young Earth creationism can tolerate. So that's an easy one. Now we go down here to Tristan da Cunha. So this is an island in the Atlantic Ocean that was settled in the early 1800s. So this paper from 1998, Sudial et al., does the same kind of math there. You go back to that settling population, you look at the mutation accumulation since then, you can calculate the rate. Donny says this is a tiny inbred island population with unique demographic quirks. None of that matters. You're just looking at mitochondrial DNA, which is haploid. It's inherited through the matrilinear line, so you don't have to worry about homozygosity or inbreeding or anything like that. Then he goes back to his classics, Parsons, for example, from 1997. I'm surprised he didn't mention Ding 2015 in here, but that's another paper that creationists like to lean on. Then he says, cherry-picking unusual populations does nothing to overturn the global pedigree pattern. So one thing right here, this global pattern, he says that a couple times in here, and I'll point it out again later on, but it's a pedigree. It's not going to be global. There's no such thing as a global pedigree analysis. So that's just nonsense. And then cherry picking, here's the thing that they cherry pick, and it's not me doing the cherry picking, it's the creationists, because cherry picking is when you only look at the single generation studies and not the multi-generation studies. So that's Parsons, Ding, it's the Y chromosome ones that Jeanson uses in the book Traced. I forget what this Howell paper is, so I don't know which one that is, but creationists will lean on single generation pedigree studies, and that matters because you don't have selection filtering out mutations over a single generation. You have more of the mutations will persist. Only the hard selection is going to operate that fast. You go over multiple generations, selection weeds out those deleterious mutations, and you have a slower rate of accumulation, right? So I did a whole video on this where I went through other pedigrees that are not single generation. I'll link that video down below, and the data in those are very clear. Even just going back a century, 2 centuries, 5 centuries, you get the long-term rate that is consistent with the most recent common ancestor, somewhere in the 100,000 year ago range. Then we have, we have King et al. I love this paper. So this is a really fun one, because it's a direct lineage to King Richard III's, I forget if it was mother or his grandmother or his aunt. It was the matrilinear lineage directly from Richard III, his family, to the present. So we know exactly who these people were, when they were alive, when they had kids, all of the people in between, and the 2 descendants that are alive now. So we can just directly say it's this many generations and how many mutations are there. And when you do that, this paper, Nathaniel Jeanson's math predicts a bunch of mutations, like 10 or 12. I forget the number. It's in the double digits. And in the 2 people, one of them had no mutations and the other one had 1, which is, again, consistent with the evolutionary rate, or what they'll call the phylogenetic rate. Basically, it's the slower substitution rate, which gets you the kind of mainstream dating time for the mitochondrial most recent common ancestor, right? So I don't know why he talks about like migration events here. This study is not about migration events, but that's fine, because you could also anchor your date in a known settlement event. It's a good way to do it. Now, here's the thing that I want to point out here. This approach is circular. This approach is circular. How is this approach circular? Like, my specific question is, a direct historically recorded lineage is a circular argument? How is that circular, Donny? Be specific. Be specific. This is what I mean when I say there's not a whole lot of substance here, and this is just an example of this. You're not going to get more substance from like Nathaniel Jeanson, for example, but this is lazy. Calling this study circular, and as though like that addresses the problem, that is lazy, right? This is not an attempt to correct the discrepancy, right? This is an attempt to just directly count mutations over a period of time. It's a direct, simple calculation. How many mutations per generation are there? Known event, present day. How many mutations? Easy. There's no attempt to correct a discrepancy. It's just basic population genetics. They acknowledge, he says this so many times in this article, they acknowledge that short-term pedigree studies consistently report much faster mutation rates than phylogenetic clocks. First of all, that word is wrong. It's substitution rate, not mutation rate. The mutation rate doesn't change. It's the accumulation rate, the substitution rate, where you see a drop-off in mutations persisting over time. So if you look long-term, the number of mutations present is less than if you look short-term. I've been correcting this for literally years. It's not a change in the mutation rate over time. It is that you lose mutations over time, so the substitution rate is slower the further back you go. I can only say that so many times. I've literally corrected this to Donny's face, and he keeps saying it wrong. All right, misrepresenting Babel. The Babel dispersal prediction fails. He says Babel predicts diversity near Mesopotamia, but since Africa has the most diversity, this disproves it. That's a straw man. That's the surprise. It's a straw man. There are multiple lines of evidence that point to a sub-Saharan African epicenter for human diversity and migration, right? It's not just one thing, right? There's no one single observation that invalidates a Mesopotamian epicenter. It's a bunch of stuff. Now, here, I love this line. If Babel was in Mesopotamia, the surrounding regions, including Africa, would show high diversity, and that's exactly what we observe. This is just beautiful. Like, this is the used cars salesman in Donny right here. Like, here's a thing that's not the case, and I'm going to claim it's the case, right? He's saying the surrounding regions would show high diversity. And that's exactly what we observe. The region of the world with the highest diversity is specifically sub-Saharan Africa. Those are not the same region. The epicenter, if you actually do the math more precisely, is modern-day Ethiopia, geographically. That is not particularly close to Mesopotamia. There are parts of Africa that are close to Mesopotamia, but they're not the same parts where all the genetic data points to as the origin point for human migration that led us around the rest of the world, okay? So this is just, telling me that 2 + 2 = 5. This line is just, that's exactly what we observe. No, it's not. No, it isn't. And just the audacity. Just say that with a straight face tells you how unserious this is. And then we have here additional factors explain Africa's elevated diversity. And he goes through a few faster mutation rates in certain haplogroups, larger founding groups in Africa compared to elsewhere, selective sweeps, reducing Eurasian diversity, and epicenter bias. Now, he doesn't explain any of these. And he says, faster mutation rates, therefore XYZ. And the reason for that, and what's going to pop up here, is that each of these explanations is contradicted by other data that he's ignoring. So focusing just on this first one as an example here, faster mutation rates in certain African haplogroups. So certain specific populations are going to have different faster mutation rates, and that explains the higher genetic diversity. Okay, here's the problem. One of the things that points to sub-Saharan Africa as the epicenter is this thing called linkage equilibrium, meaning basically how well mixed are the variants in your genome. Is having one variant informative of having another one, or is having one variant not tell you what you're likely to have at another site in your genome? When that's the case, when they're not informative of each other, when they're uncorrelated, that's called linkage equilibrium. We see the highest level of linkage equilibrium within Africa. If you had lineage-specific elevated mutation rates, those specific lineages would have very high linkage disequilibrium because they'd have a bunch of mutations that are unique to each of those lineages. We're just not going to engage with those observations, I guess, right? We're just going to pretend those data don't exist. And there's no way to reconcile those observations with anything except a sub-Saharan African origin and epicenter of migration. Another big one that applies to these is the nesting problem. You can say there's going to be a selective sweep reducing Eurasian diversity, but if you have one lineage that migrates into Africa and they don't have a selective sweep, right? And then you have everybody else has a selective sweep. You just reduced a bunch of diversity in everybody else, but you're going to have different diversity in Africa. You won't have a clean nesting pattern like we actually have. The existing pattern is that all non-African populations, their genetic diversity nests within the African clade. If you have something like outside of Africa bottlenecks or outside of Africa selective sweeps, you're not going to see that because you're going to have an epicenter outside of Africa, then one group, the African group, doing one thing genetically, and everyone else doing a different thing. They're not going to nest within each other, okay? So no, you can't just say, oh, a larger founded group in Africa compared to anywhere. No. The nesting pattern means you have to start in Africa, and everyone has to leave from there. Moving further down here, we're actually at the end of the article proper. Right? So now we're at the bottom line, and he hasn't actually made any good arguments. He's ignoring data. He's telling me a paper says the opposite of what it actually says. He's cherry picking single generation pedigrees, ignoring multi-generation pedigrees. We're not doing anything new to move the ball forward in this conversation. Now, fortunately, we're not done yet. We have a bunch of appendices where we have additional arguments. I don't know why it's structured like this. This doesn't seem to make sense to me. You could just add some of this stuff down here into the upper part of the article because they're different arguments. I don't know, but whatever. Let's talk about this stuff. So Appendix A is this paper from 2009, Soares et al., Correcting for Purifying Selection and Improved Human Mitochondrial Molecular Clock. I love this paper. I think this paper is excellent because they anchor their calculations in known migration events, things like island settlements, for example. So that's really useful. So what they show. They acknowledge that purifying selection has a modest effect on the coding region of mitochondrial DNA. They say purifying selection is a thing. That's it. If we all agree on that, then the young Earth calculations are wrong because they're ignoring purifying selection. If you're taking the one generation number of mutations and extrapolating that backwards infinitely, which is what Jeanson does, in his words, I'm using the mutation rate as a substitution rate. Those are Jeanson's words. If you're doing that, you're ignoring purifying selection, and that invalidates everything. So purifying selection is real. We agree, therefore Jeanson is wrong. I could stop right there. Everyone agrees purifying selection exists in the mitochondrial DNA. Now, Standing is trying to kind of play this down a little bit. It has a modest effect on the coding region. Oh, it only affects the coding region. Now, in the human genome, that's very small. That's like 1.5% of the nuclear DNA is protein coding. In the mitochondrial genome, that's about 90%. So even a modest effect on 90% of the genome is going to substantially slow down the mutation accumulation rate to the point where you cannot accommodate a young Earth timeline. So thank you, Standing for Truth. That one line right there, if we all agree on that, we're good. Discussion over. The young Earth timeline is wrong. They propose a corrected clock by focusing on synonymous sites and mixing coding and control regions. Yes, so there's actually a table where they break it down by region of the mitochondrial genome. They calculate the overall rate for the entire genome, and then they break it out region specific. Yes, it's very comprehensive, good work. I love how creationists do this thing where they describe the nuance of a study as though it's a bad thing. But that's what Donny is doing right here. Now, even with their corrections, their dates for migrations, e.g. humans entering the Americas about 15,000 years ago, are much younger than traditional deep time claims. Okay, that's still outside the young Earth model. Like, are you saying you want humans to enter the Americas 15,000 years ago? Because if you are cool with that, then we're good, because that invalidates the young Earth model. Also, that's more recent than some of the times that they calculated, which, to be clear, match historical and archaeological records. So you're looking at things like 30 or 45,000 years ago. And if Donny wants to say, oh, look, their methodology, they only got 15,000 years. Well, okay, what about the dates that are further back in the past? Are you cool with those? I don't think so. So why are you bringing this one up? It's don't bring up data unless as an argument unless you're prepared to accept those data. And creationists do this all the time. If they want to use data as part of their argument, and then also not accept those data as valid because they also invalidate their position. Now, why doesn't this undermine the biblical model? Pedigree rates remain direct evidence. And pedigrees disprove the young Earth timeline. And I've gone over this in detail. And again, video down below. You look at multi-generation pedigrees, you get the slow mutation accumulation rate. Okay, purifying selection does not erase nearly neutral drift. Okay, look, we just talked about how the coding region is 90% of the genome. There's this other thing called background selection. Background selection is where you have a mutation occurs and it's really bad, so it gets selected against, and everything that's linked with it, all the other mutations in that genome, are then also removed or reduced in frequency due to their linkage with the harmful selectable mutation. Now, why does this matter for mitochondria? Because 84% of the mitochondrial genome does not change. It is the same across all of humanity, which is indicative, as we've talked about, of extremely strong purifying selection operating on the mitochondrial genome. Now, if you have 84% of the genome that you can't change, any mutations that occur in that other 16%, if then subsequently a harmful mutation occurs in that 84% and you select it out, you're also taking all those other mutations in the non-locked region. I don't want to say non-constrained because there can still be selection there. There can still be constraint. It just might not be as tight. But I'll say in the variable region, right? The 16% rather than the 84%. If you select out a mutation from that 84%, you're also removing the mutations that are present in the 16%. And even if those mutations are present in other individuals, by removing them from some subset of the individuals, you are reducing the rate at which they achieve fixation in the population. You are slowing down the rate of mutation accumulation. So having purifying selection operating on so much of the genome combined with background selection means it doesn't matter if they're neutral, they're still not going to fix at the purely neutral rate. It's going to be slower due to the selection. That's the answer to that objection. Now we come down here to problems Donny has with the phylogenetic calibration, and I just love this. Assumed historical dates from archaeology, linguistics, or historical records. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about things that happened in the last 2,000 to 3,000 years in this paper. We're talking about things like the settlement of the Canary Islands and Vanuatu. These are not things that happened 50,000 years ago. These are things that happened within the last 2,000 to 3,000 years. We have historical records. We have crystal clear archaeology. And then here, this is not a direct measurement of mutation rate. It's an indirect calibration that bakes evolutionary assumptions into the result. My response to that right there is what assumptions? Specifically, Donny, like what evolutionary assumptions are based into the calculation where you say the Canary Islands were settled this many years ago? The Canary Islands population differs from the mainland sister population by this many mutations. Therefore, the mutation accumulation rate is X. What specific evolutionary assumptions are baked into that calculation? Because they just say it, and they just throw that out there. Oh, evolutionary assumptions. They never say what they are, because there aren't any, right? That's it. All it is what I just described. And they have no way to actually attack that on the merits, so they have to throw a smokescreen by saying, oh, evolutionary assumptions. It's just simple math building off of the historical record. Even Soros acknowledges that short-term pedigree studies consistently show fast rates. Yes, that is true because of selection happening, as we've talked about. That is what happens. This is extremely basic population genetics. Like, I don't understand, this is the thing creationists do, similar to something I mentioned before, where they just like describe the science in very basic terms and expect that to be an argument. No, you have to like make the argument, right? Why is this number wrong and this number right? Like, yeah, they acknowledge that there's a difference. Yes. Why are you right? The answer is you're not. Creationists, right? Because the math is what it is. So this is extremely basic population genetics. Yes. So now I'm going to skip the biblical perspective. I don't care. Conclusion, yada, yada. Let's go to the next one. D-loop and pedigree objection. So this is where I said they're looking at the, just looking at the D-loop rather than the whole genome, and the D-loop region is the region that mutates a lot faster, and the rest of the genome is under much stronger purifying selection. We actually saw that in that Soares paper when I previously talked about this. I pointed out how if you go region by region, the substitution rate in the coding regions is much slower than in the D-loop region, the control region, which also involves an area called the hypervariable region because it mutates faster. Like, that's why it has that name. So here's what Donny says. While the D-loop is indeed variable, the rates observed there are not outliers. When extrapolated, they scale proportionally with the rest of the genome. I don't know if Donny can't read or if this is a lie, but it's one of the two. Either he is functionally illiterate and unable to read, or he is lying to your face. You do not scale the mutation rates in the hypervariable region to the rest of the genome. They are not the same because, as we've talked about, that Soares 09 paper, they actually broke out the rates by region of the genome, and we're talking orders of magnitude difference between them. In addition to that, we have a young Earth creationist has shown how this is wrong. Dr. Rob Carter from Creation Ministries International actually has a legit paper on this, showing that 84% of the mitochondrial genome does not vary among humans. So you literally can't extrapolate the mutation rate in one region to the rest of the genome when the rest of the genome doesn't have any variation in it. You can't do that. And again, that's not like me saying this. This is Dr. Rob Carter, young Earth creationist. That paper on the consistency of the mitochondrial genome is extraordinarily strong evidence against the young Earth model because it means there has to be strong purifying selection operating on most of the genome. The genome isn't like magically immune to mutations happening. They happen, they just get filtered out. And since we talked about background selection earlier, when that happens, they take the other mutations with them, reducing the fixation rate. Again, in order to say this line that is highlighted, Donny is either just blatantly lying, he has made a decision to just lie to your face, or he is unable to read. He is functionally illiterate and does not understand the words that he is reading when he tries to read these papers. Those are the two options. There's no other option here. For this part, that's it. Those are the two options. It's that simple. Let us continue, because we are not done yet. We are almost done. Okay. Now he gets to my objection where I say multi-generational pedigrees agree with substitution rates. Yes, basically the multi-generational pedigrees going back just even a couple hundred years show essentially the same rate as, longer term calibrations using like known migration and settlement events. Yes. So one thing he says, these are not global samples. Okay, then toss out all of your pedigrees. No pedigree is a global sample. So you can just toss out everything and start from scratch. No pedigree is a global sample. If that's your standard, then stop citing all the pedigrees that you cite all the time, okay? Still assumption driven. Even for these studies, researchers often calibrate their models against assuming long timescales or archaeological events. No, I don't know where he's getting that. If we're talking about multi-generational pedigrees, we're not calibrating them against archaeological events or the historical record or whatever. We're anchoring it at a known family member in the past, and then going from that known family member however many generations forward. This is not an assumption-driven approach, unless we're disputing like who someone's great-great-grandfather was in the 1800s. So again, I'm going to ask, what assumptions specifically are there? Like, be clear what assumptions are being made in, for example, the King et al. Paper, the one looking at the Richard III mitochondrial lineage from his female relative to the present. What evolutionary assumptions are being made there? Donny can't tell you. No creationists can, because there aren't any. And they're lying when they say there are. It's that simple. All right, let's see. Is there any more in here? No, this is all repetitive. So like we already addressed migrations. Yeah, pedigree remains the gold standard. This is just standard standing for truth nonsense. Let's see. Again, we're doing island migrations. Canary Island, Tristan da Cunha, Norfolk. Like, it's highly repetitive. Okay, here's we're getting near the end now. Purifying selection makes fixation slower. Yes. They say that once purifying selection is included, fixation must be slower. Yes, that is like, I don't know how to respond to someone saying that's not true, because I'm trying to open this note. There we go. This is literally, mathematically, definitionally true. If you have purifying selection, the rate of mutation fixation will slow down because you are removing mutations from the population at a rate faster than they are lost via genetic drift. That's literally the definition of purifying selection. So if you have purifying selection, you slow down the rate, and therefore you blow through the time limit for young Earth creationism. Now let's look at what the actual answers here are. The pedigrees already filter. They're saying there's already selection happening. That's only hard selection. That's only if it kills you, it doesn't move on. Now that's still enough. To be clear, that's still enough. But there's more over more generations. You're going to have soft selection. You're going to reduce the frequency, reduce the likelihood of reproduction, rather than just kill the lineage in a single generation. And then nearly neutral equals neutral in small populations. Totally doesn't matter because we talked about genetic background selection before. So totally doesn't matter. Yes, you're going to have selection reducing the frequency of neutral and nearly neutral mutations because we all agree there are deleterious mutations that occur in the mitochondrial genome, and those can get filtered out. If anyone disagrees with that, then I don't know where, like, now we're just saying, the sky is cheese. Like, I don't know what to say to that. So let's see. Final word, anticipated objections. Oh, here we go. This is where we'll end it because now we're at the references. So this is the last thing I just want to point out here. For me, Donny, the goal has always been clear: to push the discussion forward by being the hardest worker in the room. I write, research, and publish relentlessly, not for rhetorical games, but because the evidence demands answers and the public deserves clarity. Couple brief thoughts on this. One, if the public deserves clarity, you should proofread your articles, make them less repetitive, and make the organizational flow make sense. Also, if you are spending years doing all of this work, you should come out the other side of that with a basic understanding of population genetics, which is clearly lacking since we're denying the fact that purifying selection is going to reduce the rate of mutation fixation in a population, which again is just 2 + 2 = 5 territory. So I don't know what to make of that. But again, what I want to point out here, big picture, is that this is being put forward as an attempt to move the ball forward, right? As an attempt to move the ball down the field and advance the conversation. Here are our claims, here are the objections, here's why those objections are wrong. But the here's why those objections are wrong are the claims. Or just nuh-uh, right? This article is basically a mix of, but pedigree rates, so we get a Donny Deal's fallacy in there. A, here's why A is wrong, but have you considered A, right? It's just pedigree rates over and over again. And nuh-uh, the islands weren't settled at that time. Nuh-uh, that pedigree doesn't count because made up reasons. It's not global. It has evolutionary assumptions, whatever. Nonsense reasons. So that's where we get to leave this one, I think. I think that's where we can stop it. So that is Donny and Matt's attempt to respond to the objections, to all the reasons why the young Earth creationist calculations for the timing for the mitochondrial most recent common ancestor are wrong. Again, it all boils down to the same arguments they were making initially and a generous helping of nuh-uh, which involves a lot of misunderstanding basic population genetics math. That's it, folks. The last thing I'll say before we go is that, yes, it is silly to go through this article by Donny and Matt because they are fundamentally the randos on YouTube. They're not serious actors, as you can see by looking at like their childish approach to much of the way they engage in this conversation, right? The reason that it's still important to do it is to give people the tools to respond to these things without having to like have a PhD in genetics, right? But the second reason is that this may be surprising based on the weakness of these arguments, but fundamentally, you're not going to find better arguments from like Answers in Genesis or Creation Ministries International. So you get the responses here. They're applicable in responding to those professional creationists as well, who aren't actually going to do a better job of it. So that's where we can leave this one, everybody. Thank you all for watching. I hope everyone found that informative. Before you go, please remember to hit the like button, leave a comment, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, share this video, and as always, don't get fooled.